Israel is facing more international criticism today as their prime minister promises an offensive in Rafah. The plan to invade the southern border city is drawing concern from Israel's closest ally, the United States, who are demanding to see a credible plan to protect civilians. France, meantime, is threatening sanctions on Israel if aid crossings aren't opened up. This all happening as the question of genocide in Gaza returns to the World Court.
Germany firmly rejects Nicaragua's accusations. Germany only supplies arms on the basis of detailed scrutiny, a scrutiny that not only respects but far exceeds the requirements of international law.
Germany denying today that it is aiding genocide in Gaza by selling Israel arms. Their defense is in response to a suit brought to the United Nations top court by Nicaragua, asking them to order Berlin to halt military arms exports to Israel.
Germany cannot invoke that Israel is in some state of necessity of its assistance for its defense and survival. In spite of its size and population, Israel is in the top 10% of the most militarily powerful countries in the world. Its per capita expense is more than 4 times larger than that of Germany.
Germany and other Western nations have faced street protests, various legal cases, and accusations of hypocrisy from campaign groups who say Israel has killed too many Palestinian civilians in its 6-month military assault. Germany says the accusations at the International Court of Justice are unfounded.
Unlike Nicaragua, we are striving to do justice to both parties to the conflict.
The case at the ICJ comes as more ceasefire talks in hopes of ending the war between Israel and Hamas are underway in Cairo. Today, Egyptian officials said mediators have presented a new proposal that would include a 6-week pause in fighting and a swap of 40 Hamas-held hostages of the more than 130 that remain captive for at least 700 Palestinians imprisoned by Israel. But despite reports of progress towards a deal, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says no force in the world will prevent Israel from completing the elimination of Hamas brigades, including in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. Netanyahu also saying a date has been set for an Israeli invasion of Rafah, prompting concern from foreign governments.
The President's been very clear about our concerns, our deep concerns, about Israel's ability to move civilians out of harm's way, to care for them once they're out of harm's way, and to have any kind of major military operation that doesn't do real harm to civilians.
Israel is gravely concerned by repeated indications from Israel that it may soon launch a military offensive into Rafah. Palestinian citizens must not be made to pay the price of defeating Hamas.
The concerns about what an offensive in Rafah would mean for the approximately 1.4 million civilians living there come on the heels of the Israeli forces' withdrawal from 2 besieged areas. Over the weekend, Israeli troops withdrew from the southern Gaza city of Khan Younis, leaving behind severe devastation. Neighborhoods have been destroyed and the whole city left in rubble. Israeli troops left the Al-Shifa hospital complex in similar conditions. Gaza's civil defense says 380 bodies have been recovered from the area since forces withdrew last week, adding to the more than 33,000 dead Palestinians since the war began 6 months ago. While the world braces for what's to come in Rafah, international pressure for Israel to improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza grows.
Food convoys that should be going particularly to the north, where 70% of people face famine conditions, are more likely, actually 3 times more likely to be denied than any other humanitarian convoy with other kinds of material. That's quite astonishing, isn't it?
France's foreign minister also saying today that his country is using all levels of influence, including threats of sanctions, to force Israel to open crossings with Gaza for vital humanitarian aid. Israel says 468 aid trucks moved into the enclave today, the highest since the conflict began. That followed 419 on Monday, though the Red Crescent and United Nations gave much lower figures, with the UN saying many trucks were only half full because of Israeli inspection rules. Aid organizations say Gaza faces famine and widespread disease, with nearly all its inhabitants now homeless. And tonight we're hearing from the families of some of the American hostages being held by Hamas. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris met with them today for the first time since October for an update on efforts to return their loved ones. 5 Americans remain unaccounted for.
We have just come out of a very productive meeting with Vice President Harris, and one of the things we talked about is that there is a possibility of holding 2 truths. You can believe, as we do, that it is horrible that innocent civilians in Gaza are suffering, and at the same time, you can also know that it is horrible and against international law for hostages to be held against their will.
There is hope for people on both sides of the border only after the hostages come home. What we have heard is that there is a deal on the table right now that all of the parties agree to and are willing to work with. We are waiting now, and the world waits for Hamas to get to yes.